Millionaire CEO avoided women for 15 years, but was captivated by a poor cleaning lady who soaked his pants. Before we begin the story, leave a comment telling us what city you're watching from. And at the end, don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10. Enjoy. Chloe Park, newly hired as a night janitor, was humming while cleaning the lobby. She grabbed a full bucket of water and, without looking around, threw it toward the floor. That's when she heard a short, startled yell. "Hey, what the—" Chloe's eyes widened. A tall man in a perfectly tailored dark suit with a fierce expression was standing right in front of her, his pants completely soaked up to the knees. "Oh my God!" Chloe cried out, dropping the bucket. Then she covered her mouth with both hands. Her eyes were wide with panic. I didn't see you coming. I swear. You came out of nowhere. I thought the hallway was empty." The man looked up with an unreadable expression. Water dripped silently from the hem of his pants. He seemed frozen in place. That was unnecessary," he said, his voice calm and tense, like he was talking to someone highly contagious. Chloe rushed to the cleaning cart and pulled out a yellow microfiber cloth, holding it out like it was some sacred offering. "Here, it's great for drying. I even use it on my mom's stove. It soaks up everything. Just wipe it and it'll dry quickly. Unless that suit's made of unicorn wool or something." The man didn't move a muscle. His eyes went from the cloth to her face, then to the floor, then back to the cloth again, which she was still holding out, shaking slightly. "Sorry about that, Mr. Fancy Suit," Chloe added, trying to lighten the moment with a smile. He didn't reply, just silence. Thick, awkward silence. Without saying a single word, he turned on his heels, carefully avoiding the wire, and walked toward the elevator. Chloe tried to save some dignity. "Hey, you're not going to take the cloth? It's from the dry and hug line. You're missing out." The elevator doors closed. Chloe was left alone with a tipped bucket, a soaked floor, and the undeniable feeling that she had just made the biggest mistake of her brand new job. An hour later, she was in the company cafeteria, holding a cup of iced tea that made no sense with the freezing air conditioning. "Did you hear what happened with the guy from the executive floor?" one admin worker whispered. "Someone threw water on him, right in the hallway," another replied. "He was soaked from the waist down and had that face like, 'I'll buy the planet just to fire you with flair.'" "That happened to Mr. Collins, didn't it? CEO Richard Collins?" another employee added. Chloe froze. "Mr. Who?" she asked, slowly turning. "Richard Collins, the CEO. He just got back from a trip today. Doesn't touch anyone. Always wears gloves. Cold as a final boss in a video game." Chloe swallowed hard. "Gloves? Tall? Fancy suit? Looked like he's never taken a bus?" The woman nodded. She sank in her chair, staring at her cup. "Oh no. I soaked the CEO with diluted bleach water, and I offered him a stovecloth." Rosalind the cook came up behind her and patted her on the back. "Welcome to Volt, Chloe. At least you made a memorable entrance." At the top of the building, in the quietest room of the company, Richard Collins was drying the hem of his pants with disposable towels. A fresh pair of gloves rested neatly on the table. The old, soaked ones had already been thrown away. His assistant appeared at the door. "Do you need another change of clothes, sir?" "No," Richard replied, not looking up. The assistant hesitated. "Is something wrong?" Richard didn't answer. With a small movement, he opened a drawer and pulled out a cloth handkerchief, running it across his fingers, even though they were already dry. But his mind wasn't in the room. He was replaying the bucket scene in his head over and over. The sound of the water, the girl's face, her sarcastic tone, her boldness. She didn't blink, didn't look down. "Sorry about that, Mr. Fancy Suit." Dry and hug cloth. Unbelievable. Unacceptable. Intriguing. In the janitor's closet, Chloe was reorganizing the cart, biting her lip. The panic was starting to really set in. "Do you think he could sue me? Like liquid assault or something?" she asked Rosalind, who was laughing while scrubbing a pot. "The only thing you assaulted was his patience." "I should have run, grabbed the bucket, and left like nothing happened." "Chloe, you handed a dishcloth to a man worth more than an airport. Running away would have been the least you could do." She sighed and looked up at the ceiling. "Well, at least now he knows who I am." Rosalind laughed even harder. "Knows you? Honey, he's going to dream about you soaking his leg for years." Chloe laughed too, but inside, something strange was stirring, a different kind of nervousness. a subtle shiver. And just a few rooms away, Richard was also feeling something he couldn't quite name. It had been 15 years since he allowed himself any kind of emotional involvement. But for the first time in a very long while, he was curious. Very curious. The next day, Chloe showed up to work with a strange feeling in her stomach. It wasn't exactly fear, but more like a mix of curiosity and anxiety that made her glance around every corner, half expecting to see the man with the wet pants. While cleaning that morning, she spotted Richard Collins in the main hallway. He was walking with steady steps, talking on the phone, and his hands were covered with light gray fabric gloves that looked far too expensive to be practical. "I've never seen anything like this," Chloe murmured to Rosalind, who was passing by with a tray of coffee. "Only rich folks come up with these weird things. Who wears gloves to talk on the phone? What does he think he'll catch? A success virus?" Rosalind chuckled softly. "He's always been that way. Since he started working here about 5 years ago, no one's ever seen him without gloves, not even to shake hands. But why? Does he have some kind of skin condition? No one knows. The cleaning staff has always wondered. Some think he's a germaphobe. Others say it's just rich people being eccentric." Chloe watched Richard disappear into the elevator, still puzzled. There was something about him that sparked her natural curiosity. The same curiosity that once led her to take apart old TVs just to see how they worked inside. Meanwhile, on the executive floor, Richard couldn't focus during the strategy meeting. His mind kept drifting back to the scene from the day before. The girl with the bucket, the way she offered to help, the complete lack of fear in his presence. 15 years. 15 years since a woman had spoken to him in such a natural way. When the meeting ended, he called for Marcus, his personal assistant. "I need information on the new cleaning staff, the one who works the night shift." Marcus raised an eyebrow, surprised. "Is there a problem, Mr. Collins?" "Just professional curiosity. I want to know her background." Marcus mentally noted that this was the first time in years the boss had shown interest in anyone outside the executive team. "I'll have it for you by the end of the day." A few hours later, Richard had a file in front of him that genuinely surprised him. Chloe Park, 28 years old, born in San Francisco. A former fashion designer with a degree in design from the California Academy of the Arts. She had worked for several emerging brands and had even been featured in fashion magazines. Then, 3 years ago, she simply vanished from the fashion world. The last records showed a series of mysterious debts and lawsuits that seemed to have forced her into a completely different life. From promising designer to night janitor, how does someone make a change like that? Richard placed the file in the drawer, but his curiosity only grew. For the rest of the week, he found himself paying attention to schedules, knowing when Chloe would be working. Not that he was looking for her on purpose. At least that's what he kept telling himself. On Friday, a meeting ran late, and Richard decided to stay at the office to finish some reports. It was almost midnight when he heard strange sounds coming from the main lobby. Soft music, rhythmic footsteps, laughter. Curious, he quietly went down 2 floors and hid behind a marble column. What he saw left him completely speechless. Chloe was in the middle of the lobby, using cleaning cloths as if they were high-fashion fabrics. She had tied a blue cloth around her neck like a cape, another around her waist like a skirt, and a third was draped over her shoulders as an accessory. With soft music playing from her phone, she walked between the tables, striking dramatic poses and talking to herself. And here we have the new glamorous cleaning collection. Notice the flawless drape of the multi-use cloth, the velvet-like texture that only the Soaks It All brand can offer. She spun around dramatically, almost tripping over her own cleaning cart, and burst out laughing. The perfect accessory for the modern woman who needs to clean the world and still look fabulous. She continued, posing like a professional model. Available in bleach blue, disinfectant green, and classic multi-purpose yellow. Richard watched from his hiding spot, completely fascinated. There was a woman who had lost everything, now working as a janitor in the middle of the night. And still she found joy and creativity in the most unlikely situation. She suddenly stopped, looked at her reflection in the building's mirrored window, and her smile turned a bit sad. "Chloe Park, stylist of mops," she whispered to herself. "Mom would be proud." At that moment, something touched Richard in a way he didn't expect. It wasn't pity, it was recognition. The determination of someone who refused to give up, even when everything seemed lost. "What a crazy girl," he whispered to himself, but there was genuine admiration in his voice. Chloe went back to work, putting away her makeshift fashion pieces and resuming her cleaning as if nothing had happened. Richard watched for a few more minutes, impressed by how efficient she was. Even while having fun, she was meticulous and detail-oriented. When he finally returned to his office, Richard was sure of one thing. Chloe Park was unlike anyone he had ever met. And for the first time in 15 years, he wanted to know more about someone. A lot more. The following Monday, Chloe arrived at work feeling refreshed. The weekend had been productive. She finished a dress she was sewing for the neighbor's daughter and even had time to reorganize her small apartment. Small victories, but victories nonetheless. The night shift at Volt Dynamics had its perks. The building was quiet, free of rushed executives and noisy meetings. Running the vacuum through the empty hallways and tidying up the conference rooms was almost meditative. When she reached the executive floor, Chloe grabbed her master keys and entered the main conference room, the one with the huge glass table and chairs that probably cost more than 3 months of her rent. Richard Collins usually used this space for the company's most important meetings. While wiping the table, something caught her eye. A brown folder had fallen behind one of the chairs, partly hidden under the table. Probably dropped during the last meeting, and no one had noticed. "Let's see if there's a name on it," she murmured, bending down to pick it up. When she opened it to look for some kind of ID, her eyes widened. The heading on the document read, "Project Aurora, Confidential, Restricted Access." It was clearly something important, full of complex graphs, financial projections, and what looked like a draft for a new line of tech products. Chloe knew she should just close the folder and leave it on the table for someone to pick up. But her natural curiosity, the same one that made her figure out how to fix broken things, was stronger. "Just a quick look," she said to herself. The project seemed to be about smart wearable devices focused on health monitoring. The technical specs were impressive, but as she read, some things didn't quite add up. Her background in design and materials, along with years working with fabrics and structure, made certain inconsistencies jump off the page. The material suggested for the wristband might be comfortable, but it wouldn't be durable enough for constant wear. The interface design had potential, but the button layout wasn't ergonomic. And there was a clear error in the production cost calculations. Someone had multiplied when they should have divided. Without thinking twice, Chloe pulled a blank sheet from the notepad she always carried in her purse and began writing her observations. Her handwriting was neat, a result of years of taking detailed notes for sewing and pattern work. "Improvement suggestions for Project Aurora, from a humble observer," she wrote at the top. 1. Wristband material. Consider using medical-grade silicone with a breathable fabric cover, more comfortable for 24-hour wear and hypoallergenic. Interface. Buttons are too close together. People with larger fingers may struggle. Suggest increasing spacing by 3 mm and using different textures for easy touch. Error in production cost on page 12. 2,450,000 y 15,000 units equals a $163.33 per unit, not $244.50 as noted. Overall design. Very masculine. 52% of health device users are women. What about more color options and a softer, more feminine design? After finishing the notes, Chloe couldn't resist grabbing a few colorful sticky notes she always carried, a habit from her designer days when she used them to mark ideas in magazines. On the pink one she wrote, "This project is amazing. Congrats on the innovation." On the yellow, "The marketing team will love the sleep tracking feature. Who doesn't want to know why they wake up tired after 8 hours?" On the green, "Watch out for the battery. No one wants to charge another device every day, maybe solar-powered." And on the blue one, with a little smiley face, "Sorry if I'm being nosy. I can't help it. Chloe, the janitor who soaked your suit." Pleased with her contributions, she placed the sheet with her notes inside the folder, stuck the colorful post-its on the front, left everything neatly in the center of the table, and went back to cleaning. The next day, Richard Collins arrived at the office earlier than usual. He hadn't slept well, thinking about strategies for the launch of Project Aurora. It was Volt Dynamics' riskiest investment in the past 5 years, and every detail needed to be perfect. When he entered the conference room to review the documents one last time before the meeting with investors, he found his folder placed neatly at the center of the table. For a moment, he thought it was odd. He was sure he had locked it in the drawer before leaving on Friday. As he opened the folder, he was stunned. Colorful sticky notes popped out like confetti, and a handwritten sheet was carefully placed on top of the official documents. His first reaction was anger. Someone had accessed a confidential document. Someone had touched information that could be worth millions. His jaw tightened, and he reached for the phone to call security. But then he saw the signature. Chloe, the janitor who soaked your suit. The janitor, the girl with the bucket. How dare she? Richard read through the notes, his irritation growing, but as he continued reading, his expression began to change. The mistake in the calculations was correct. He had reviewed those numbers at least 5 times and hadn't noticed. The suggestions about ergonomics made sense. And the comment about the female demographic, that was something neither he nor his design team had properly considered. The sticky notes, while far too informal for his taste, contained valid insights. The battery issue was a real concern they were still trying to solve. And the marketing note. Richard leaned back in his chair, confused. He was angry about the breach of privacy, but also impressed by the quality of the feedback. How had a janitor spotted flaws that a team of engineers and designers hadn't? He picked up the phone and dialed Marcus. I need you to call in the employee Chloe Park for a private meeting. Now. Is there a problem, sir? That's what I intend to find out. 30 minutes later, Chloe was standing in front of the conference room door, her heart racing. Marcus had been polite but vague about the reason for the meeting, which only made her more anxious. She knocked lightly. Come in, came Richard's familiar voice. Chloe opened the door and saw Richard sitting at the head of the table, with her folder open in front of him. Her colorful sticky notes were spread across the glass table like evidence from a crime scene. Have a seat, he said, pointing to the nearest chair. Chloe sat on the edge of the chair, ready to run at the first sign of trouble. I imagine you know why you're here, Richard began, his voice controlled but carrying an underlying tension. About the folder? Chloe asked, swallowing hard. Look, I just wanted to return it. It had fallen, and I thought, you read confidential documents. I know I shouldn't have. It was just curiosity. I promise I won't tell anyone. Richard picked up the sheet with her notes. And this? You wrote this out of curiosity too? Chloe looked at her own handwriting on the paper and felt her cheeks flush. I kind of couldn't help myself. When I see something that can be improved, my brain just starts working. It's a habit from when I was a designer. I'm sorry, it was totally inappropriate. You were a designer? Richard asked, raising an eyebrow. Chloe realized she had said too much. I was. Before everything went wrong and I ended up here. Richard studied her face for a long moment. There was sincerity there, and a sharp mind he hadn't expected to find. Your notes are accurate, especially the one about the production costs. Chloe blinked, surprised. They are? And your suggestions about design and the target audience irrelevant. Does that mean I'm not getting fired? Richard didn't answer right away. Instead, he closed the folder and leaned back in his chair, watching Chloe with an unreadable expression. It means, Miss Park, that we're going to have a very interesting conversation. Richard Collins had never found himself in a situation like this. Sitting across from a janitor who had just corrected $1 million project using colorful sticky notes, he was torn between professional outrage and a genuine curiosity he hadn't felt in years. Chloe remained on the edge of her seat, clearly ready to flee if the conversation took a bad turn. Her hands were clasped in her lap, but Richard noticed she was tapping her fingers nervously, a sign that beneath her calm appearance, her mind was very much alive. Miss Park. Richard began, choosing his words carefully. Your observations about Project Aurora show a unique perspective. And that brings me to a proposal that might sound a little strange. Chloe raised an eyebrow. Stranger than calling me in to talk about sticky notes? Considerably stranger, Richard replied, almost smiling. I want to offer you a temporary role, an experiment. What kind of experiment? It's not the kind that involves lab rats, is it? Because I have a phobia. Richard paused, processing the unexpected comment. No, nothing with rats. It's an experiment about human interaction and empathy in business leadership. Chloe tilted her head, confused. Could you say that in plain English? Volt Dynamics is facing problems with workplace morale. Employees feel unmotivated, communication between departments is weak, and the teams are lacking creativity. I believe your outside perspective, someone who sees the company from a different angle, could provide valuable insight. So you want me to be like a spy? Not exactly. I want you to interact with people naturally, observe the dynamics, and give me honest feedback on what you see, like a social test to understand how your presence affects the work environment. Chloe looked at him for a long moment. Let me get this straight. You want to pay me to just be myself and talk to people? To put it simply, yes. And what would my official title be? Professional talker? Richard actually considered the question. Temporary interpersonal relations consultant. Chloe laughed in disbelief. You're serious, aren't you? Completely serious. You've shown a sharp eye for detail and a practical point of view that might be exactly what we need. For the first time since walking into the room, Chloe leaned back in her chair. All right, but if I'm going to take this crazy offer, I've got a few conditions. Richard frowned. He wasn't used to negotiating with employees, especially not with janitors who had just been promoted. What kind of conditions? First, a raise. If I'm going to be a consultant, I want consultant pay. Doesn't have to be over the top, just fair, reasonable. Go on. Second, a decent coffee machine on the janitor floor. That thing downstairs you all call coffee is an insult to humanity. Richard had to suppress a smile. And third, the right to wear Crocs. They're comfortable, practical, and after 8 hours on my feet, my toes are grateful. Crocs, Richard repeated, as if tasting a word in a foreign language. Yes, Crocs. Those colorful rubber shoes everyone thinks are ugly but are incredibly comfy. Negotiable? Richard looked at Chloe's determined expression and realized she was completely serious about the Crocs. I accept your terms. When can you start? Right now, if you want. But can I keep doing my cleaning shifts too? I like the work. It sort of calms me. Of course. You can keep your current duties and take on the new role as you feel comfortable. Chloe held out her hand. Then we have a deal, Mr. Collins. Richard looked at her extended hand. Normally, he would avoid any physical contact, but something about the moment made him hesitate instead of pulling away. He nodded. We have a deal, Miss Park. In the days that followed, Chloe embraced her new role with the same energy she brought to everything in life. She began to chat more intentionally with employees from different departments, not just during the night shift, but also during lunch breaks and between meetings. And Chloe being Chloe, the conversations quickly became memorable. You know, Sandra, she said to the receptionist as she watered the lobby plants. These plants look a little sad. I bet it's because no one talks to them. Talk to plants? Sandra asked, curious. Of course. Plants are like shy people. They respond well to attention. Chloe turned to the nearest fern. Hi, sweetheart. How are you today? Your leaves look amazing. Sandra laughed, but kept watching as Chloe continued her chat with the greenery. I can't believe you actually talk to plants. Why not? They're great listeners. They never interrupt, never judge, and they're always in the same place when I need them. Several employees walking by witnessed the scene, and soon the story of Chloe talking to plants spread through the company. But instead of making fun of her, people began to imitate her. The lobby became livelier, with employees occasionally greeting the plants and even suggesting new arrangements. In the IT department, Chloe discovered that Marcus, the technician in charge of computer maintenance, was passionate about origami. You really make these figures out of paper? Chloe asked, admiring a beautifully folded dragon on his desk. It's a hobby. Helps me relax after dealing with network issues all day. Wow, this is amazing. Have you ever thought about teaching others? I bet the finance folks would love it. They're always stressed out with spreadsheets. A week later, Marcus was leading casual origami sessions in the lunchroom, with a cheerful group of employees from different departments joining in. But it was a seemingly small moment that really caught the attention of the whole company. Chloe was cleaning the main lobby when the background music started playing an instrumental version of an 80s pop song. Without thinking, she began swaying to the rhythm, using her mop as a dance partner. Two security guards, Carlos and Miguel, happened to be walking by and stopped to watch, amused. "Hey Carlos," Chloe called out. "Do you know how to dance salsa?" "A little," Carlos replied, a bit shy. "Then come on over. Miguel, can you film us?" What happened next was an impromptu dance performance right in the Volt Dynamics lobby. Chloe, in her bright pink Crocs, danced with Carlos while Miguel recorded the moment, laughing so hard he could barely hold the phone steady. Other employees started gathering, clapping and cheering them on. Even some of the executives stopped to watch, smiling in a way no one had seen in months. Miguel shared the video in the company's WhatsApp group with the caption, "When work actually gets fun." Within hours, the video had spread. Employees shared it on their personal social media, tagging the company. It quickly gained hundreds, then thousands of views. Positive comments about Volt Dynamics' fun culture and human work environment started pouring in. When Richard heard about the video, his first reaction was concern. Employees dancing on the job didn't exactly fit the corporate image he had worked to build. But when he watched the footage, something unexpected happened. He laughed. Not a polite smile or a forced social chuckle. A real, genuine laugh, the first he'd had in years. Chloe's spontaneity, the guards' joy, the positive reaction from the staff, it all created a kind of atmosphere he hadn't realized he missed. The video kept circulating, eventually landing on HR blogs and workplace culture sites. Volt Dynamics was suddenly being praised as an example of a company that values employee well-being and fosters a positive environment. Richard called Chloe that afternoon. "I need to see you in my office." Chloe headed up with her heart pounding, thinking she had finally crossed some invisible line. About the video, she began as soon as she walked in. "The video," Richard said, "has nearly 50,000 views and is being shared as an example of outstanding workplace culture. Is that good or bad? It's unexpected and effective." Richard paused, still sorting through his own feelings. "In just 2 weeks since starting your new role, you've had more positive impact on this company's morale than any HR initiative we've tried in the past 2 years. Chloe smiled, relieved. "So I'm not getting fired for dancing with the security guards?" "No, actually. I want to understand better how you do it. How do you manage to connect with people like that?" Chloe shrugged. "I don't know. I think it's just being real. Treating everyone like people. It's not rocket science." Richard watched her for a moment, seeing something he hadn't recognized in someone in a long time. Complete authenticity. She wasn't trying to impress, manipulate, or gain anything. She was just being herself. No filters, no pretense. And for the first time in 15 years, Richard Collins wondered what it might be like to live that way. It was an ordinary Thursday when fate decided to throw Richard Collins and Chloe Park a curveball. Richard had just finished a meeting on the 15th floor and was taking the elevator down to the lobby when it stopped on the 8th floor. The doors opened, and Chloe stepped in. "Hey, boss," she said cheerfully, pressing the ground floor button. "How's the social experiment going? Have you discovered any secrets about humanity yet?" Richard gave a polite nod, keeping his usual formal posture. He was getting used to Chloe's natural style, but her informality still made him slightly uncomfortable. The elevator moved down normally until the 5th floor, when suddenly there was a jolt and everything came to a halt. The lights flickered once, then settled into emergency lighting. "That's odd," Chloe murmured, pressing a few buttons. "Do you think?" Richard was already on the elevator's emergency phone, but the line was silent. He tried his cell phone. No signal. The reality of the situation started to sink in. They were stuck. "No, no, no," Richard murmured, pacing back and forth in the small space. "This can't be happening." Chloe watched his sudden change in behavior. The man who was always in control was now visibly agitated, breathing faster and sweating despite the air conditioning. "Hey, take it easy," she said, setting her bucket down. "We're going to be fine. Someone will notice the elevator's stuck and come get us." "You don't understand," Richard said, clearly distressed. "I can't be trapped, not in small spaces. Not for long." Chloe frowned, concerned. It was the first time she had seen Richard without his usual composed mask. "Do you have claustrophobia?" "Among other things," he answered, trying to calm himself down, but clearly struggling. Chloe thought quickly. She needed to distract him. "You know what? This reminds me of when I lived in a laundromat." Richard stopped pacing and looked at her. "You lived in a laundromat?" "For about 6 months when I was 19. Long story, there was a musician boyfriend, an apartment that caught fire, and a very kind Chinese woman who let me sleep behind the washing machines." Despite the panic, Richard found himself curious. Behind the machines? Mrs. Liu, that was her name, had a little storage area in the back where she kept detergent and fabric softener. She set up a little spot for me with a mattress. The sound of the machines was like a giant lullaby. I slept like a baby. Chloe sat down on the floor of the elevator and motioned for Richard to join her. But the funny part is, I started talking to the clothes. Seriously, there was a blue suit that came in every week with the same coffee stain on the chest. I called it Mr. Clumsy and made up stories about his life. Even in his anxious state, Richard couldn't help but smile a little. "You really talked to the clothes?" "I did. And it wasn't just me. Mrs. Liu did it too. She said clothes carry people's memories, so they have stories to tell." Chloe gestured animatedly. "There was a red dress that always came in after parties. I called it Dances Till Dawn. And a work shirt that came in every week, always covered in paint. That was the secret artist." Richard noticed his breathing had started to calm. Chloe's voice had something soothing about it, and her silly stories were actually helping him relax. "Wait a second," Chloe said suddenly, glancing at his hands. "You're not wearing gloves." Richard looked down at his own hands as if noticing them for the first time. "I forgot to put on a new pair after the meeting." "And how do you feel? Are your hands falling off? Did you catch some mysterious disease?" "Don't be ridiculous," Richard said, but there was a hint of uncertainty in his voice. "Then why do you always wear gloves? Is it some kind of allergy?" Richard was quiet for a long moment. The small space, the stress of the situation, and Chloe's oddly comforting presence created an atmosphere that made him want to talk about things he had never shared with anyone. "It's not an allergy," he finally said. "It's protection." "Protection from what? From closeness? From intimacy? From women?" Chloe tilted her head, waiting for him to continue. "My mother left me when I was 7, Richard said, his voice lower now. "She had a new boyfriend every week. Different men came and went from our house constantly, and then one day she just left with one of them and never came back." "Oh, Richard, I grew up in foster homes and group shelters. I learned that women leave. Always. So I decided it was safer not to get close to anyone. The gloves are a physical barrier, a constant reminder to keep my distance." Chloe was quiet for a moment, taking in the unexpected vulnerability. "You know what I think?" she said gently. "I think you're missing out on a lot of good things because of one person who didn't see what a treasure she had. It's not that simple." "Yes, it is. Look, want to try something?" Chloe asked, extending her hand. "Let's see if the world ends when you touch my hand without gloves." Richard looked at her hand like it was a dangerous object. "I can't." "Yes, you can. It's just a hand. It won't hurt you, I promise. And you know why? Because when we stop trying so hard to protect ourselves, life becomes more beautiful, easier, more real." With his heart pounding, Richard slowly reached out and touched Chloe's hand. Her skin was warm and surprisingly soft. There were no lightning bolts, no explosions, no end of the world, just the simplest, most natural form of human contact. "See?" Chloe said softly. "The world's still turning." They stayed like that for a few minutes, quietly, with their hands gently clasped. Richard felt a mix of panic and something he couldn't quite name. Maybe relief. "Thank you," he murmured, "for distracting me. For this. You're welcome. And you know what? You should try being a little kinder to people out there, too. No gloves, no walls. I bet you'd find most people are actually pretty nice if you give them a chance." The stress of the situation was starting to catch up with them, and Chloe felt her eyelids getting heavy. Without thinking much, she leaned her head on Richard's shoulder. "I'm just going to close my eyes for a minute," she murmured. Richard froze for a moment, then gradually relaxed. The scent of Chloe's shampoo was soft, and the weight of her head on his shoulder felt comforting. 2 hours later, When the maintenance team finally opened the elevator doors, they found a scene that left the gathered employees completely stunned. Chloe Park, peacefully asleep on Richard Collins's shoulder, and the CEO of the company not only allowing it, but actually looking strangely at ease. The buzz that spread through Volt Dynamics that day would be remembered for a long time. After all, no one had ever seen Richard Collins without gloves, let alone letting someone sleep on his shoulder. And as Chloe woke up, confused, and Richard tried to regain his composure, they both knew that something fundamental had shifted between them in that small space between the 5th and 6th floors. In the days following the elevator incident, something remarkable started happening at Volt Dynamics. Richard Collins, the CEO known for being cold and distant, was different. On Monday morning, Marcus nearly dropped his coffee when he saw Richard walk into the office without gloves. Not for long. Just about 15 minutes before putting them back on, but it was visible progress. "Good morning, Marcus," Richard said, and for the first time in years, there was something close to a smile on his face. Good morning, Mr. Collins," Marcus stammered, still trying to process the change. The transformation became even more noticeable during a walk through the office. Richard stopped at Sandra's desk, the receptionist. "Sandra, how's your son doing? He had the flu last week, right?" Sandra looked at him as if she'd seen a ghost. He's better. Thank you for asking, Mr. Collins." In the accounting department, he nodded to Teresa, who had worked there for 5 years and had never received direct acknowledgement. "Nice work on the quarterly reports, Teresa. Very thorough." Teresa was so surprised she forgot to reply. And when he passed the morning cleaning crew, something even more surprising happened. Richard laughed. A genuine laugh as he watched Carlos trying to teach dance steps to other employees during a break. "Looks like the dancing bug is going around," he said, and his comment came with humor, not disapproval. Chloe watched these changes with quiet satisfaction. Her experiment was working better than she had imagined, and Richard was slowly becoming more human in the eyes of his staff. "Have you noticed he's different?" Sandra asked Chloe during lunch. "Everyone's noticed?" Chloe replied, "It's like someone finally found his human mode switch and turned it on." The new, more approachable version of Richard also showed up in company meetings. Chloe had been unofficially promoted to common sense consultant and now sat in on a few important discussions, offering perspectives the executive team had never considered. It was during one of those meetings that her input saved the company from a major PR disaster. "We're considering sponsoring the Night of the Stars charity event," explained James, the marketing director. "It'll be great exposure for the brand." Chloe raised her hand a bit hesitantly. "Can I ask something? Did you look into who else is involved in the event? It's a charity event. What could go wrong?" James replied, slightly annoyed by the interruption. "It's just that I read in the paper that the main organizer is under investigation for money laundering. If you sponsor the event now and things go south, Volt could get dragged into a scandal." The room fell silent. James quickly checked his tablet and turned pale. She's right. How did we miss that?" "Because you were focused on numbers and visibility," Chloe said gently. "Sometimes it takes someone from the outside to notice the obvious." Richard watched the exchange with growing admiration. Chloe had a natural ability to see things others overlooked, even seasoned professionals. "Thank you, Chloe," he said. "You saved us from a major headache." "You're welcome. That's what common sense is for, right?" Unfortunately, the growing closeness between Richard and Chloe didn't go unnoticed by everyone. A week later, an article appeared on a business gossip blog with the headline, "Ambitious Janitor Seduces Millionaire CEO, the New Scandal at Volt Dynamics." The article, full of malicious speculation and out-of-context photos, portrayed Chloe as an opportunist using her feminine charms to manipulate Richard and climb the corporate ladder. Internal sources report that the employee, a failed former fashion designer, has been seen in executive meetings and has a suspicious relationship with the CEO, who is known for avoiding women. Coincidence? Not likely. Chloe read the article on her phone during her break, feeling her stomach sink. Around her, people were whispering and glancing sideways. Some looked sympathetic, others suspicious. "Don't believe any of it," said Rosalind, appearing beside her. Everyone here knows the kind of person you are. But what if people start thinking it's true? Chloe asked, her voice shaking. What if Richard starts to doubt my intentions? Richard's smart. He knows who you are. But the doubt had already taken root in Chloe's mind. The rest of the day, she noticed strange looks, conversations that stopped when she walked by, and a general discomfort that hadn't been there before. When Richard found out about the article, he was furious. He immediately called the legal department to discuss taking action against the blog. Mr. Collins, Marcus said hesitantly, maybe we should consider limiting public interactions with Miss Park, at least until this blows over. Absolutely not, Richard replied firmly. I won't let petty gossip dictate how I run my company. But when he went looking for Chloe to talk to her about it, she was nowhere to be found. Marcus told him she had asked to speak with him urgently earlier, but he had been in a meeting. Richard finally found her in the janitor's closet, packing up her things into a box. What are you doing? Chloe looked at him with red eyes. I'm quitting. Because of a ridiculous article? It's not just the article, Richard. It's what it represents. People will always question why I'm here. They'll always assume I'm taking advantage of you. And do you care what they think? I care about what this does to you, Chloe said, her voice cracking slightly. You are finally starting to open up, to trust people. I don't want you to close yourself off again because of me. Chloe, you can't leave. You're important to the company, to me. That's exactly why I have to go, she said, closing the box. As long as I'm here, you'll never be able to relate to people normally. There will always be that doubt hanging in the air. Richard felt something he hadn't experienced in years, desperation. The thought of Chloe walking out of his life hit him like a punch to the gut. Please, reconsider. We can fix this. It's already fixed, Chloe said, picking up the box. Take care of yourself, Richard, and don't go back to wearing gloves. You're much better without them. She left the room before he could respond. In the days that followed, Chloe's absence was felt throughout the company. The lobby plant started looking sad again. Employees went back to their usual routines. The relaxed, lively atmosphere she had created slowly faded. And Richard Collins, for the first time in 15 years, learned what it meant to truly miss someone. He found himself glancing down hallways, hoping to hear her laugh in the elevators, waiting for her clever remarks in meetings that now felt dull and stiff. The gloves were back on his hands. But now they felt more like a prison than protection. And Richard Collins began to understand that maybe, just maybe, he had lost the one person who had shown him who he really could be. 3 days had passed since Chloe left Volt Dynamics, and Richard Collins was completely lost. He had tried to get back to his usual routine, meetings, reports, strategic decisions, but his mind kept drifting to her absence. It was as if an essential part of the building had been removed, leaving everything just a bit off balance. On Thursday night, when the building was nearly empty, Richard found himself walking the halls where Chloe used to work. He didn't have a specific plan. He just felt an inexplicable need to be in the places she had once been. That's when he passed by the old janitor's supply room and noticed something odd. The door was slightly open, and a faint light was coming from inside. Curious, he pushed the door open and stopped in his tracks at what he saw. The small room had been turned into a personal space. A small mirror hung on the wall, a few plants in makeshift pots decorated the shelves, and there was even a cushion on the floor, creating a cozy little corner among the cleaning supplies. But what really caught his attention was an open shoebox on a low shelf. Dozens of envelopes and folded papers spilled out, as if someone had left in a hurry and forgotten them. Richard hesitated. Going through Chloe's personal belongings would be an invasion of privacy. But curiosity, and maybe something deeper, got the better of him. He picked up the first envelope. It wasn't addressed to anyone, just dated 3 months ago. Carefully, he pulled out the handwritten letter inside. Dear future Chloe, the letter began. Today was my first day cleaning offices. My hands are sore and I smell like disinfectant, but at least it's honest work. I hope that by the time you read this in the future, you've found something better, or at least gotten used to the smell. Richard frowned, intrigued. Did she write letters to herself? He picked up another letter, this one older. Dear me, it said. Larissa made amazing progress in physical therapy today. The doctor said she might be able to walk with help in a few months. Getting everything up for my little sister was worth it. I still miss the studio, but some things matter more than your own dreams. Richard's heart tightened. A disabled sister? He had no idea. With slightly trembling hands, he kept reading. Each letter revealed another layer of Chloe's life, one she had never shared with anyone at the company. Dear brave Chloe, read one from 2 months ago. Today I worked from 6 in the morning to 11 at night, food deliveries in the morning, cleaning at night. Larissa asked why I'm always so tired when I get home. I won't tell her that sometimes I nap in the car between jobs. She already feels guilty enough. Richard sat heavily on the makeshift chair. The image he had of Chloe, the spontaneous, cheerful janitor, was turning into something much more complex and moving. Another letter. Dear Dreamer, she wrote. Today I watched a fashion show on TV and cried. Not from sadness, but from longing. I miss creating, seeing my designs come to life. But then Larissa laughed at a silly joke on TV, and I remembered there are things more important than fame. Still, sometimes I dream that someone will see me, really see me, for what I'm capable of. Richard's hands were shaking now. I dream that someone will see me. The words echoed in his mind. He picked up a more recent letter, written just days before she left the company. Dear confused Chloe, it read. Something strange happened at work. The CEO, that cold man who always wears gloves, is being kind to me. I don't understand why. Part of me wants to believe he sees something in me beyond being just a janitor. But another part is scared I'm imagining too much. People like me don't make a difference in the lives of people like him. Richard had to stop reading for a moment. How could she be so wrong about her own worth? The last letter in the box was dated just a few days ago. Dear Chloe, who's leaving? She wrote. Today I decided to leave Volt. Not because I don't like the job, but because I'm starting to feel things I shouldn't feel. Richard Collins is a good man underneath all that armor. He just needs someone to believe in him. But it can't be me. People will always question my motives, and he'll always wonder if I'm being sincere. It's better to leave before I ruin the only good thing that's happened in my professional life in a long time. Maybe someday someone will help him take those gloves off for good. Richard closed the letter with trembling hands. He felt like he had just read the private diary of an extraordinary person who saw herself as ordinary. He kept exploring the little box. There were sketches of clothing drawn on napkins, poems written on post-it notes, and even a few photos. One showed Chloe with a young woman in a wheelchair, clearly her sister Larissa. Both were beaming in front of a simple birthday cake. At the bottom of the box, he found a small notebook. On the first page it read, Plans for when I make it out of this. Richard read the list that followed. Open a small sewing studio. Teach Larissa how to sew. She's always wanted to learn. Make clothes for people who can't afford beautiful ones. Maybe, one day, do a charity fashion show. Be seen for who I really am, not for what people assume I am. Each item on the list was accompanied by small drawings and enthusiastic notes. It was the work of someone who had never lost hope, even in the toughest situations. Richard closed the notebook and leaned back in the chair. For the first time in his adult life, he felt genuinely humble. He had spent years building walls to protect himself from people who might hurt him, and in the process, he had lost the ability to recognize someone truly special when she appeared right in front of him. Chloe Park wasn't just a janitor who made him laugh. She was a woman who had sacrificed her dreams for her family, who found joy in the smallest things, who saw potential where others saw only routine. She was authentic in a way he didn't even know existed, and he was letting her slip away. Richard carefully put the letters back in the box, but instead of leaving it in the room, he took it with him. Not to invade Chloe's privacy, but because he finally understood what he was losing. She wasn't just an employee. She wasn't just someone who made him feel human again. She was the most genuine and brave person he had ever met. And for the first time in 15 years, Richard Collins knew exactly what he needed to do. He was going to find her, and he was going to do everything he could to deserve being seen by her the way she deserved to be seen by him. Completely, authentically, without gloves and without fear. Richard Collins had never dressed to be invisible. His entire adult life, his perfect suits and authoritative posture made sure he was noticed and respected wherever he went. But now, standing in front of the mirror in his closet, he held a simple t-shirt and a baseball cap as if they were alien artifacts. "This is ridiculous," he muttered to himself, putting the cap on for the third time and adjusting the brim. A CEO of a multi-million-dollar company shouldn't be playing detective. But the image of Chloe's letters wouldn't leave his mind. The authenticity, the courage, the simple yet deep dreams, all of it had touched him in a way he couldn't ignore. Marcus had gotten Chloe's address from the HR file, but when Richard went there, he found out she had moved. The building owner said she had left the apartment a week ago without giving a forwarding address. That's how Richard found himself wandering through Boston neighborhoods, dressed like an ordinary person, searching for a woman who could be anywhere in the city. The first 2 days, he felt completely lost. He walked through Chinatown, North End, Back Bay, places he had never set foot in without a driver waiting. It was strange to be on the streets, breathing the city air, hearing casual conversations of people who had no idea who he was. On the morning of the third day, while walking through a more alternative area near Cambridge, he saw something that made him stop in the middle of the sidewalk. A small coffee stand was set up on a busy corner. It wasn't anything special, just a folding table, some thermos bottles, and stacks of disposable cups. But what caught his attention were the drawings. On each cup, someone had made little works of art with a marker. Delicate flowers, geometric patterns, small smiling animals, and the handwriting on the menu board was unmistakably familiar. "Chloe," he whispered. She was facing away, making coffee for a customer, wearing a colorful apron over a simple blouse. Her hair was tied back in a casual ponytail, and she hummed a song as she worked. Richard watched for a few minutes, hiding behind a pole. There was something different about her, a lightness he hadn't noticed when she worked at Volt. Here, in this small business of her own, she seemed exactly where she was meant to be. When the customer walked away, Richard took a deep breath and stepped up to the stand. "Good morning," he said, trying to keep his voice casual. Chloe turned around and her eyes widened in surprise. For a moment, she looked like a child caught doing something wrong. "Richard, what are you doing here? And why are you dressed like that?" He looked down, remembering his unremarkable outfit. "I was exploring the city, and I recognized your handwriting." Chloe crossed her arms, clearly uncomfortable. "How did you find me?" "Pure luck," he lied. "Can I get a coffee?" She hesitated, but then nodded. "What kind?" "Whatever you recommend." Chloe quietly made a cappuccino, and Richard watched her hands work. She drew while the coffee cooled a bit, a small sun with delicate rays around the cup. $5, she said, handing the cup over without looking directly at him. Richard paid and took a sip of the coffee. It was excellent, much better than anything he drank at the office. "It's delicious." "Thank you." There was an awkward silence. Other customers came closer and Chloe focused on them, clearly hoping Richard would leave. "Chloe," he finally said, "can we talk?" "There's nothing to talk about," she replied, not looking at him. "I've made my decision. About going back to the company, about everything." Richard understood it wasn't the time to push. He finished his coffee and stepped back, but not before hearing Chloe greet the next customer with her usual energy. The next day, he came back, and the day after that too. Every morning, Richard showed up at Chloe's coffee stand, dressed casually, ordered a coffee, tried to start a conversation, and was politely ignored. She served him professionally, but there was no sign of the closeness they built at the company. "Don't you have work to do?" she asked on the fourth day, drawing a small owl on his cup. "I do," he admitted, "but this is more important." "What's more important?" "You." Chloe stopped drawing and looked at him directly for the first time since day one. "Richard, you don't really know me." "I know, and that's exactly why I'm here." She shook her head and kept working, but he noticed there was less irritation in her movements. On the fifth day, she drew a small bird flying. On the sixth, a flower with delicate petals. On the seventh day, she wrote, "Thank you for your patience," in small letters next to the drawing. Richard began looking forward to those little drawings. They became a quiet way of communicating between them, the only way Chloe allowed him to get close. On the 8th morning, Richard woke up with a strange feeling of anticipation. There was something different in the air, like something important was about to happen. When he arrived at the stand, Chloe was making his coffee before he even ordered. She had memorized his order: a cappuccino with an extra pinch of cinnamon. "Good morning," she said, and for the first time in a week, there was a small smile on her face. "Good morning." She worked on the drawing longer than usual, biting her lip in concentration. Richard waited patiently, watching the subtle expressions cross her face. Finally, she handed him the cup. Next to the drawing of two birds flying together, there was a message written in her careful handwriting: "If you're really brave, invite me to dance, but no gloves." Richard looked at the message, then at Chloe, who was clearly nervous about her own boldness. "Are you serious?" he asked. "You've been coming here for a whole week," she said, nervously tidying up the stand's tools. "Either you're very persistent or very brave. Or maybe just very stubborn. What if it's a little bit of all three?" For the first time in days, Chloe laughed, that genuine laugh he had missed so much. "Then I guess you deserve a chance to prove it." Richard looked at his own hands. He was wearing gloves, as always. Slowly, he took them off and put them in his pocket. "Chloe Park," he said, extending his bare hand. "Would you like to dance with me?" She looked at the outstretched hand, then at his face, and Richard saw the exact moment she decided to trust him again. "Yes," she said, placing her hand in his. "I'd really like that." The next morning, Chloe was making coffee when her phone buzzed with a message from a number she recognized immediately. "Meet me in the Volt Dynamics parking lot tonight at 8. Please trust me, Richard." She read the message 3 times, biting her lip. After a week of avoiding deeper contact with him, agreeing to dance had been a moment of impulse. But now, with daylight and reality setting in, she wondered if she was doing the right thing. Still, something inside her, maybe curiosity, maybe hope, made her reply, "I'll be there." What Chloe didn't know was that Richard had spent the whole day organizing an operation involving half the office. Marcus, initially skeptical about his boss's crazy plan, ended up getting excited about the idea. "Mr. Collins," said Carlos, the security guard who had danced with Chloe in the lobby, "we got the LED lights and the extension cords." Miguel brought his portable sound system. "And the candles?" Richard asked, checking his mental list. "Sandra got some big candles that won't blow out in the wind," Rosalind replied. She had volunteered to help as soon as she heard about the plan. "And I brought some flowers from my garden." Richard looked around the company parking lot, trying to picture how it would be transformed. It was a risky plan, and completely out of his usual character, but something about Chloe made him want to try things he'd never considered before. By 7 o'clock, the parking lot was unrecognizable. Strings of LED lights created an improvised starry ceiling. Thick candles in glass holders were placed carefully to give off soft light. Wildflowers decorated the edges of the space, and the sound system was tested and working perfectly. "Boss," Miguel said, fixing the last details, "if this doesn't win her heart, nothing will." Richard nervously adjusted his tie. He'd swapped his casual suit for something nicer, but not too formal. His gloves were in his pocket. He still wasn't brave enough to go completely without them, but he was determined to try. At exactly 8, Chloe appeared at the entrance of the parking lot and stopped abruptly. Her eyes widened at the transformation. "Oh my God," she whispered. "What is all this?" "An impromptu dance," Richard said, walking toward her. "For a lady who deserves way more than a regular parking lot." Chloe wore a navy blue dress that she had clearly made by hand. The cut was simple but elegant, and little details on the seams showed her skill as a designer. She looked beautiful in a way that made Richard momentarily forget how to breathe. "You made all this for me?" she asked, still taking in the scene. "I had help," Richard admitted. "Apparently, you've won over more people at the company than you realize." The music started, a soft ballad Richard had carefully picked. He reached out his hand to her, but hesitated when he remembered the gloves. He began, looking at his own hands. "Hey," Chloe said softly, stepping closer. "Remember what we talked about in the elevator? About life being more beautiful without barriers?" With trembling hands, Richard slowly took off his gloves. His palms were sweaty from nerves. "What if I can't do it? What if it's too hard?" Chloe gently took his hands, intertwining their fingers. Then we go slow, together. The music wrapped around them as they began to dance. Richard was clearly nervous, his movements stiff, and he seemed to be overthinking every step. "Relax," Chloe said, smiling. "This isn't a performance, it's just the two of us." But the very moment Richard tried to relax, he stepped on Chloe's foot. "Ouch! Sorry, He started, mortified. Chloe burst out laughing. "It's nothing. My Crocs have been through worse." They started again, but Richard was even more tense. On the next spin, he tripped over his own feet and nearly knocked them both down. Chloe laughed even louder. "Richard, you're trying to dance like it's a business meeting. Stop overthinking." "I don't know how to stop thinking," he admitted, smiling despite his frustration. "Then think of me," she said, looking him straight in the eyes. "Just me." Something changed then. Richard stopped worrying about the steps, about being perfect, about control. His eyes locked on Chloe's, and for the first time in his life, he simply let himself feel. The dance became more natural. Not perfect. He still stepped on her occasionally, and she still laughed, but real, authentic, like everything about Chloe. When the music ended, they were closer than when they started. Richard could feel her breath, see every detail of her face in the candlelight. "Chloe," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I need to tell you something." "What?" "I'm in love with you." Before she could answer, he kissed her. It was a soft kiss, hesitant at first, but it deepened when she returned it. When they pulled apart, Chloe was smiling with tears in her eyes. "I'm in love with you too," she whispered. They stayed wrapped in each other's arms for a long moment, swaying gently even without music. "Chloe," Richard said finally, "come back to the company, not as a cleaner but as my official advisor, as my partner in all this. Richard, the company isn't the same without you. I'm not the same without you. I want you by my side, not just at work but in everything, forever." Chloe looked at the man who had changed so much in the last few weeks, who had literally and figuratively taken off his gloves for her. "Yes," she said, smiling. "Yes to everything." Under the makeshift lights and surrounded by the soft scent of candles, Richard Collins and Chloe Park made a promise far bigger than any work contract. It was the start of a new life. Together. The Monday after the impromptu dance, Chloe returned to Volt Dynamics with a smile she couldn't hide. Her new role as interpersonal relations consultant had been made official, and she arrived early to organize her new office, a small room with a window, very different from the supply closet where she used to keep her things. She had barely finished arranging her plants when Marcus appeared at the door, looking worried. "Chloe, Mr. Collins needs to see you in the main conference room. Now." His tone made her stomach tighten. When she got to the room, she found Richard sitting at the head of the table, with 5 men in suits she didn't recognize. They all wore serious, hostile expressions. "Miss Park," said the oldest man, clearly the leader of the group. "I'm Harold Whitman, chairman of the board. We need to have a serious conversation about your position in this company." Chloe sat in the chair Richard pointed to, noticing he looked tense and annoyed. "The shareholders have some concerns about your presence here," Whitman continued. "They claim that having a former cleaner in a consulting role damages the premium image Volt Dynamics tries to maintain in the market." "With all due respect," Chloe interrupted, "my work here has significantly improved the company's environment and—" "Miss," cut another shareholder, "we're not questioning your personal competence. But our clients expect to deal with top professionals. Your presence might suggest the company is lowering its standards." Richard slammed his hand on the table. "That's ridiculous. Chloe Park has contributed more to this company in 1 month than many expensive consultants have in years." "Mr. Collins," Whitman said coldly, "we understand your affection for the employee, but business decisions cannot be based on personal feelings." The meeting went on for another hour, with Richard strongly defending Chloe's position. In the end, he secured a temporary agreement. She could stay for a few more weeks while her contribution was reevaluated. When they left the meeting, Richard was visibly angry. "I'm going to fire half that board," he grumbled. "Richard, calm down," Chloe said, touching his arm. "It's not worth fighting them over me." "It is worth it. You deserve to be here." In the following days, they kept their relationship secret, meeting quietly in Richard's office after hours, or in the parking lot during lunch. Small, stolen moments that became precious to both. On Thursday, Chloe invited Richard to dinner at her apartment. She had spent the whole day cooking, preparing a simple but lovingly made meal. "No one has ever cooked for me before," Richard said, looking at the table set with candles and simple flowers. "That's not true," Chloe laughed. "You must have had private chefs your whole life." "Cooking for someone and getting paid to cook are completely different things," he explained. This is love." It was a perfect night. They talked about everything: childhood, dreams, fears, plans for the future. Richard met Larissa over a video call and was charmed by Chloe's sister's vibrant personality. "She's going to like you," Chloe said, watching Richard laugh at a joke Larissa told. "You think so?" "I'm sure. You're a good person, Richard Collins, even if you try to hide it behind expensive suits." Unfortunately, their happiness didn't last long. The following Monday, a grainy photo of Richard leaving Chloe's building spread on gossip blogs. The board called an emergency meeting. This time, the room was full. Besides the shareholders, there were other executives and even some business journalists. "Mr. Collins," Whitman said, clearly pleased, "the evidence of your inappropriate involvement with the employee has made it impossible to keep up the pretense that this is purely a professional decision. My personal relationship does not affect my ability to run this company," Richard replied, his voice dangerously low. "It does when it involves questionable employees. Miss Park must be fired immediately." That's when Chloe stood up. "May I speak?" The room fell silent. All eyes turned to her. "You're right about one thing," she said, her voice clear and firm. "I don't belong in your world. I don't have a Harvard degree, I don't wear designer clothes, and I don't know how to talk about expensive wines." Some shareholders smiled, thinking she was agreeing with them. "But do you know what I do have?" Chloe continued. "I have honesty, I have compassion, and I have the ability to see people for who they really are, not just what they appear to be." She looked directly at Richard. "Richard Collins is the most honest man I've ever met. He turned a cold company into a place where real people can work and thrive. And you want to destroy that? Why? Because you're afraid I'm not good enough for him?" Her voice grew louder. "Well, I have news for you. No one needs to choose me. I already chose myself." She took off her badge and placed it on the table. "I resign from my position. Not because you demanded it, but because I refuse to work for people who believe a person's worth is measured by their bank account." The room fell completely silent. Chloe looked at Richard one last time, gave a sad smile, and walked out with her head held high. What no one knew was that one of the journalists had recorded the whole speech. Within hours, the video was spreading on social media with the title, "Woman Gives a Lesson in Dignity to a Corporate Board." In 24 hours, it had millions of views. In 48 hours, it was international news. And within a week, Chloe Park had become a symbol for a generation that refused to let others decide their worth. But for Richard, none of that mattered. What mattered was that he had lost the woman he loved, and this time, he wasn't sure if he could win her back. 3 months after the speech that went viral worldwide, Chloe Park was exactly where she'd always dreamed of being, in her own studio, surrounded by sewing machines and colorful fabrics. The space wasn't big, just a renovated warehouse in an industrial neighborhood of Boston, but it was hers. The sign at the entrance said "Recostura" in colorful hand-painted letters. Below, in smaller letters, "Where every story deserves a new chapter." "Chloe, Mrs. D. Martinez's graduation dress is finished," said Rosa, one of the 5 former cleaners Chloe had hired. "It turned out beautiful." Chloe smiled, looking at the turquoise dress hanging on the mannequin. It was for a young woman whose family couldn't afford a new dress, so Recostura was making it at a symbolic price. The business had grown quickly after her story spread. People sent old clothes to be transformed, others ordered custom pieces, and many just showed up to meet the woman from the video. Chloe had learned that her unexpected fame could be used for good. "Teresa, how's Mrs. Carmen's wedding dress coming?" Chloe asked another employee. "Almost ready. She's going to look stunning. 40 years married and renewing her vows, it's very romantic." Chloe agreed but felt a pang in her heart. In recent months, she had made several wedding dresses, and each one reminded her of what she had lost. Richard had tried to reach out a few times. flowers, letters, even visits to her coffee stand she ran on weekends. But she always kept their conversations polite and distant. Not because she didn't love him, but because she didn't want him to have to choose between her and his company. She was immersed in adjusting a skirt when she heard a knock at the door. It was Tuesday afternoon, and they didn't usually get clients at that time. "I'll see who it is," Rosa said, heading to the door. Chloe heard low voices, then Rosa returned with a confused look. "There's a man here. Says he has a special order. Seems nervous." Chloe sighed. Probably another journalist trying to get an interview. Let him in. But when the person came in, Chloe almost knocked over the sewing machine. It was Richard, wearing jeans and a simple t-shirt, carrying a large box wrapped in brown paper. "Hi," he said, clearly uncomfortable. "I hope you don't mind the visit." The other employees stopped working, recognizing him immediately. After all, he had appeared in several articles about Chloe's story. "Richard, what are you doing here?" "I brought an order, something I need your professional opinion on." He put the box on the cutting table and carefully opened it. From inside, he pulled out a dress that took Chloe's breath away. It was a simple but elegant wedding dress, made of off-white satin with delicate lace details. The neckline was modest, the skirt had just the right amount of volume, and tiny pearls decorated the bodice. "Oh my God," Chloe whispered. "Where did you get this?" "I made it," Richard said, his cheeks turning red. "Well, I had a lot of help from the company's design team, and some online classes, and 3 previous attempts that were complete disasters." "You made a wedding dress?" "For someone very special. Someone who taught me that sometimes we have to create our own chances." Chloe stepped closer and examined the dress more closely. The stitches were neat, the fit looked perfect, and the details showed great care. "Richard, this is amazing. Who's the lucky bride?" "I don't know yet," he said nervously. "It depends on her answer." Chloe was about to ask what he meant when she noticed something strange inside the lining of the dress. There was a small bulge, like something was sewn inside. "There's something in here," she said, feeling the fabric. "There is. Can you open it?" I think the inner seam was a bit rushed. Carefully, Chloe unstitched a small part of the lining and pulled out a thin envelope. Inside was an elegant card with his handwriting. "Chloe Park, will you marry me? I promise to improve my sewing skills. Richard Collins." Chloe looked from the card to Richard, then to the dress, and back to Richard. The other employees had gathered, watching silently. "You're asking me to marry you? With a poorly done hem?" she finally asked. Richard laughed nervously. "Is the hem really that bad?" "Terrible. Completely amateur," Chloe said, tears in her eyes. "You'll have to redo that whole part. I can redo it as many times as needed." Actually, he knelt in front of her, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "I want to spend the rest of my life redoing things with you. Improving, growing, creating beautiful things together." Chloe looked at the simple but beautiful ring, then at the man kneeling before her, the same man who had learned to take off his gloves, to laugh, to dance clumsily, and now to sew. "And the board of directors? Your company?" "I'll handle that. Actually, I have a proposal. How about we become partners, officially? Volt can invest in Recostura. You keep your independence, I keep my company, and we build something new together." Chloe knelt down before him, holding his face in her hands. "Richard Collins, you are the most stubborn, persistent, and wonderful man I've ever met." "Is that a yes?" "It's a yes to everything. To the wedding, the partnership, redoing the hem on this dress, everything." When they kissed, the Recostura employees applauded, and someone must have filmed it, because later Chloe found out her second marriage proposal had gone viral online. But this time she didn't care at all. 6 months later, the rooftop of the Volt Dynamics building had been transformed into the most unlikely wedding venue in Boston. Richard had insisted on holding the ceremony there, the very place where he had built his career and met the love of his life. The space was decorated with simple elegance: wildflowers grown by Rosalind in her garden, LED lights woven into the roof structure, and simple chairs arranged in a semicircle. The makeshift altar offered a stunning view of the city, but all eyes were on the entrance, waiting for the bride. In the front row, Larissa Park sat radiant in her wheelchair, wearing a lilac dress Chloe had made especially for her. Next to her, former cleaning staff mingled with company executives, a scene that would never happen at a traditional corporate wedding. "Are you nervous?" asked Marcus, who had volunteered to be Richard's best man. "Terrified," Richard admitted, adjusting his tie for the 10th time. "What if she changes her mind? What if she realizes she can do better?" "Relax, Richard," laughed Carlos, who was in charge of the music. "That woman walked all across Boston to find you at a coffee stand. I don't think she's going to back out at the altar." The music started. Not a traditional wedding march, but a soft version of the song that had played at their first dance in the parking lot. The rooftop doors opened, and Chloe appeared. The dress she wore was a collective work of art. She had sewn the base, but each of her Ricostur employees had contributed some detail. Rosa had embroidered small flowers on the hem, Teresa made the delicate lace sleeves, and Carmen created the veil from vintage fabric that had belonged to her grandmother. Chloe walked down the aisle alone. She insisted she didn't need to be given away by anyone, smiling at the familiar faces on both sides. When her eyes met Richard's, he felt like the whole world made sense for the first time. "You look beautiful," he whispered as she reached the altar. "So do you," she replied, gently fixing his tie. The justice of the peace, a young and relaxed man Richard had chosen specifically for not being too formal, smiled at the couple. "Friends, we are gathered here today to unite Richard Collins and Chloe Park in marriage, and I can say in 10 years of doing weddings I've never seen a love as genuine as these two share." The ceremony was going perfectly until they got to the vows. Richard had memorized a long speech about how Chloe had changed his life, but when it was his turn to speak, the words just disappeared. "I prepared a speech," he began, nervous, "but looking at you now, I can only think of one thing. Thank you. Thank you for throwing water on me, for fixing my projects with post-it notes, for teaching me that life is better without gloves." Tears sparkled in Chloe's eyes as she laughed. "My vows are simpler," she said. "Richard, you saw me when I was invisible. You valued me when I felt worthless, and you loved me when I didn't even know I deserved to be loved. I promise to spend the rest of my life showing you that you deserve all the love in the world too." Then, just as the judge asked them to exchange rings, the most memorable moment happened. Chloe, emotional and reaching for Richard's hand, tripped slightly on her dress. Trying to steady herself, she grabbed onto the judge, who wasn't ready for the sudden support. For a terrible moment, it looked like all three might tumble into a pile in the middle of the altar. "Oh my God," Chloe shouted, laughing as she tried to steady herself. "Sorry, I was so nervous I forgot I have 2 left feet." The judge laughed, regaining his balance and composure. "Well, that's definitely a first for me." Instead of feeling embarrassed, Richard burst out laughing. Soon the whole audience was laughing too, and the ceremony's tension completely disappeared. "That's why I love you," Richard said, holding her hands tightly. "You make everything more interesting." "Even weddings?" Chloe asked, still smiling. "Especially weddings." Now completely relaxed, the judge smiled at the couple. "Richard, do you take Chloe to be your wife? To laugh with her, stumble with her, and get back up with her forever?" "I do, with great pleasure." "Chloe, do you take Richard to be your husband? To love him, challenge him, and occasionally fix his work with colorful post-its?" "I do," she said, smiling through her tears. "Then, by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Richard, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was long and tender, met with enthusiastic applause from everyone present. Carlos and Miguel released recycled confetti they had prepared, creating a colorful shower over the couple. As they held each other, surrounded by people who had become family, Chloe looked into her new husband's eyes. "You know what?" she said softly but loud enough for those nearby to hear. "What? You chose me by accident," she said, referring to the day she had thrown water on him. "But you loved me on purpose." Richard smiled, kissing her forehead. "And I will keep loving you on purpose for the rest of my life." As the sun set over Boston, lighting the rooftop with a golden glow, Richard Collins and Chloe Park, now Chloe Collins, danced their first dance as husband and wife, surrounded by an improvised family that proved true love knows no ranks, no social classes, no expectations. It was, without a doubt, the most unusual vow in history, and also the most perfect. What did you think of Richard and Chloe's story? Leave your opinion in the comments. Rate this story from 0 to 10. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell to follow all our stories, and enjoy watching more emotional stories by clicking here on the end screen.